Welcome to Policing TV. Each week, we will explore the highlights from our latest videos, diving into topics like AI, technology, drugs, and the people shaping the future of policing. In the first half of February, we continued to hear more insight from Mark Fenton-O'Creevy, Professor of Organisational Behaviour, in his interview with Scarlett. He suggests how policing organisations might get comfortable with difficult realities and become organisations that do not learn from mistakes. The discussion also delves into the structural issues within policing that contribute to ignorance and hinder effective change.
I think the place to start really is what came out of our analysis about some of the structural issues that sit behind these different ways in which ignorance is produced in policing. We talked about avoidance of uncomfortable knowledge, organisational silence, the ways in which parts of policing can become non-learning organisations. And we identified a number of things that kind of create conditions in which these problems can flourish. The first that we identified is disconnections across the rank structure. And the thing about command and control rank-based organisations is this is always potentially a problem. You have a steep hierarchy. If you add into that the cultures of blame that some people perceive inside policing, not exacerbated, not least by the desire of politicians and the media always to look for scapegoats. And it becomes very hard for people at the top of the organisation to really have a sense of the day-to-day realities of frontline policing. If you're at the very top of any organisation, then you have the advantage of being able to see the big picture, of a really good understanding of the external environment, in case of policing, to some extent, the external political environment you're operating. But scale isn't free, and senior attention is often one of the real scarce resources in any organisation.
We covered the presentation on mental health by Ian Rummery, lead psychiatrist at St Helena, and Police Constable Dwight Rummery of the Royal St Helena Police Service, at the first African Conference on Law Enforcement and Public Health, held at the University of Pretoria. Here, Ian and Dwight outlines the challenges St Helena faces.
St Helena Island is a small island in the South Atlantic Ocean with a population of just over 4,000 people. It's generally a peaceful place, but that does not mean that our police officers do not face any dangers. One of the more remote communities in the world, it has a weekly flight from Johannesburg when the weather allows, and actually over this, it's a good thing we came in the week before, because yesterday's flight didn't make it to Joburg. It got stuck on St Helena. And there's a monthly supply ship from Cape Town.
It is a British overseas territory, and we do receive funding from the UK. However, it is a self-governing territory, which means that while legislation is based on UK law, we do have our own legislation, or more commonly known as our own ordinances.
So this is a picture of St Helena Island, and this is to give you just some context, really. Where are we? So our prison is here, our police station is here, and the hospital where I work is there. So we're all fairly close together. With a small, relatively stable population, we all tend to know each other, or at least know who belongs to who in terms of family. So the person that Tobias may arrest, or I see in a clinic, may be the same person who serves us in the shop the next day.
We have been adopting a public health approach to law enforcement for years without realising it. To be clear, we don't have a document or a policy that states this, but what we would like to do today is give an example of what it looks like at a personal level when law enforcement, health professionals and others work together when a vulnerable person is arrested.
We also published our monthly partnership video with the Police Foundation. Rick Muir interviewed Dr. Katie Sean, who discusses the importance of anti-racism in policing and research, emphasising the need for community engagement and ethical methodologies. Here, she introduces the Vulnerability and Policing Futures Research Centre.
Who've logged in, which is great. Welcome, Katie, and welcome to our lunchtime exchange. And I just wonder if we could start. I mean, maybe let's start. Could you say a bit about the Vulnerability and Policing Futures Research Centre, just so people who are not familiar with it have an idea about what the centre is and what it does?
Hi everyone, thanks for joining. So the Vulnerability and Policing Centre is an ESRC funded centre, and we've got lots of projects going on, all dealing with different issues, but essentially looking at the role of kind of policing in terms of vulnerable groups and communities, and also thinking about the wider impact and kind of interrelations with other services. So whether it's youth services or healthcare services and so on, and how that kind of interlinks with policing services, and the extent to which that kind of minimises vulnerability or in some cases exasperates vulnerability.
Yeah, brilliant.
Next up was Policing Tech Forum's second webinar on youth engagement. We hear from Alex Finn, NPCC Digital Youth Engagement Lead, on their tactics to combat mis- and disinformation with the case study of the public disorder of 2024.
Yeah, it's a good question. Obviously, we work nationally, centrally through Digital Public Contact and the NPCC, but we target or engage with a very specific demographic, i.e. children and young people. Our sort of age ranges, or target age ranges, 13 to 16, but up to sort of 18, sometimes 20-year-olds as well. And so, I mean, the example of disinformation, the public disorder last year was a really good sort of case study of exactly what that looks like. I'd say we start from a position of not wanting to fan the flames unnecessarily, or shining a light on something that maybe a lot of young people aren't aware of. We do know that young people don't read newspapers, rarely look at the news. So our first step in most of these sort of situations, like the disorder last summer, is just to temperature check, to listen what young people are seeing, experiencing, asking us. And we generally, on average, can get in front of about 300,000 unique accounts on our Instagram account every month, of mostly under 18s. So it does, in the first instance, give us an opportunity to hear what exactly it is they are experiencing and seeing. So that's the first sort of point, rather than telling them about something they don't know about, which might sort of raise that anxiety level and actually cause more problems or more harm, as it were. So that's our sort of first point. And in that case last year, during the disorder, actually, majority of young people were not directly, I would say, aware of it. It seeps through eventually. I think the thing that they do get is, if a video goes viral, if there is sort of news stories that do go viral and get shared around social media, that's when it sort of pops in front of that younger demographic.
Lastly, in a packed first half of February, we were asked an unusual question. Who was the greatest policeman of all time? We hear an answer from Tom Andrews, a lecturer in policing who discusses the remarkable contributions of Captain Athelstan Popkes to modern policing.
I mean, firstly, with a name like that, how can you not be interested in somebody? And indeed, his name was kind of what first drew me to him. But yeah, I have an undergraduate degree in history. I had always wanted to be a police officer, so I joined the police, but kept that passion for history, and then kind of wanted to find out a bit more about the history of the force that I was working for and where it got to be where it was today. And the more I read about the force, the more I came across this name. And I thought, well, he keeps popping up. It's obviously a very memorable name. And so I started doing a bit more research into him. And the more I read, the more it kind of transpired that he had brought so many new innovations to policing over his time in charge of the police force. And I mean, as you say, 30 years is a long time to be in charge of a police force. He was only 37 when he was appointed, so it's not a record. Well, it's not a record by any means. There's chief constables that have served for far longer still, but it's not an age that's likely to be bested now with all the requirements to become a chief constable. Although if any PCCs are watching, then I would say I'm 38, so I mean I'd happily take a job. But no, so he's joined the police force as an outsider, which was quite influential for me as well. He came from military background and went straight in at chief constable. He came into the force at a time of sort of quite big change, 1930. We're looking at like immediately post-war, well, not immediately post-war, but sort of post World War One era of great mechanisation and the automobile becoming much more common. And we see him landing in the force from his military background, and he brings a real passion for sort of motorised transport and things. He'd had a lot of responsibility around that in the army. And so he starts with Nottingham City Police in 1930. By 1931, he has bought the force some 39 police vehicles. Now, to put that in context, beforehand, the force had 3. The chief constable had 1, and the 2 divisional superintendents had 1 each. Popkiss has gone out and bought 39 vehicles. And he writes about this, and his quote is, "What use is mobility without communication?" And so he wants to pair this. He doesn't want fire brigade style policing where he can dispatch a cop in their patrol car, go and deal with an issue, but then have to return to the station to provide any updates and get sent to another job. So he pairs this new kind of revolution in using police vehicles for patrol purposes with the introduction of wireless radios. Fairly new technology at the time. Off the top of my head, Marconi had only made his first transmission some 20 odd years before, so it was quite a fledgling technology. And long story short, he ultimately commissions a local ham radio operator to build radio sets for his police cars, fits them. To fit the radio at that time in the police car, they had to remove the entire front passenger seat. It took up the whole front passenger seat to fit this radio in. And their experiments also concluded that they had to, transmission quality was much better if they transmitted and received by Morse code than if they used voice, in like telegraphy instead of telephony. So there's these great pictures from Popkiss's first sort of patrol cars that he introduced with a Morse code transmitter on the steering wheel for the drivers to use, entire front seat.
Yes, for the driver to use.
Yes, yep, for the driver to use. Well, they couldn't have a passenger; they'd have to take the seat out.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah.
Thank you for watching. Tune in next week.